Hey guys, what is up? It's me, EDJ here, and today we are looking at another Epimetheus video. And today we're going to be looking at the history of Afghanistan summarized. So, yeah, we have touched on this region through several different points in history, but it's something that I'm really looking forward to learning more in depth on its own. Um, here in America, as you'd imagine, not always the best things we hear from here. Like a few years ago, actually, that it was known that the U.S. had actually, been in Afghanistan and conducted a withdrawal, which was a very hot topic, to put it nicely, and a lot happened there. And obviously, when here in America, at least, when we think about the Middle East and further on, you know, more eastward, usually we kind of associate it with a lot of not in the best light in the news. Usually we hear about wars and stuff and terrorism, the Taliban, etc. You get what I mean, right? So definitely the Middle East and you know more eastward, it's kind of known for being very volatile, and that's what we hear a lot about. But I am really interested in learning more about the past of places like Afghanistan, and really finding out like what exactly everything that led up to what is current day Afghanistan. I feel like this is something I'm very interested in, and I'm a real fan of Epimetheus. I've seen only a few of his videos, but I've loved every one of them. And if you want to check out more Epimetheus, the link to this video is down in the description down below. It is the first link that you will find. And if you enjoy my content and want to help me out, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. It would really help my small but humble channel grow, and I would appreciate it very much. Thank you. Now, with that said, and now without any further ado, let's get to it, shall we? Let us watch the history of Afghanistan summarized by Epimetheus.
Afghanistan, a nation of 37 million people, has one of the fastest growing populations on the planet and will soon be more populous than either Canada or Poland. It is bordered by Iran, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, China, and Pakistan. Afghanistan is located at the strategic crossroads that has connected Iranian, Central, and East Asian civilizations to India. It is one of the most mountainous countries in the world. However, it is also home to a vast network of rivers and fertile valleys, carved out by the massive snowmelt flowing from the Hindu Kush and other mountain ranges which envelop the country. More than 4,000 years ago, the farmers of this region began to urbanize. Little is known about these first ancient city-states, other than that those in the north, in the land that became known as Bactria, were culturally connected to Central Asian peoples, while those in the southeast were heavily influenced by the Indus Valley civilization, with some of the cities there likely being founded by colonists from the south. However, until more archaeological work is done, Afghanistan's ancient past will remain largely mysterious. Even Kabul, the current capital of Afghanistan, is likely to have been near continuously inhabited for more than 3,500 years, with the exact origin and people who built it unknown. Sometime during the 7th century BC, the Medes, a northern Iranian people, were the first to conquer and unite.
Alright, that's very interesting off the bat. Yeah, its geography is very interesting because it is in this weird crossroads, right? Between, further east Asia, and then obviously being being the center of Central Asia. And wow, also a lot of mystery, but it seems like, again, we've touched on this region several times in history. Obviously, here's with the Median, also known as, I think, the Persian Medes Empire later on. I apologize, my throat is super sore. It's been sore for the past few days. So if I'm talking very lowly and slowly, I apologize. Um, yeah, but so yeah, and also we've touched on it, like there's several things like the Mongol Empire and their exploits around here. Um, the Timurids, Alexander the Great, and his time if in around the area. Like, again, it's an area that we've touched upon but never really looked too deep into. But like with most places in history, definitely there's a lot to dissect there. So it's really cool to see that.
This land under their rule, which lasted approximately a little over a century. They were overthrown by the closely related Achaemenid Persians, who divided the empire up into satrapies, or provinces. By the time of the conquests of Alexander the Great, Persian people, language, culture, and religion were prevalent in what is now Afghanistan, with sizable Buddhist and Greek minorities who the Persians had resettled from their western provinces in the preceding centuries. Alexander faced some of the most formidable resistance of his conquests in Bactria, which is likely the primary reason he married the Bactrian princess Roxana, with whom he had a son, also named Alexander, which secured the allegiance of much of the Bactrian nobility and people, and access to India through the strategically important Khyber Pass. Alexander also founded several Greek colonies in the region that later became important political, commercial, and military centers. The Macedonian general Seleucus and his descendants ruled over much of the eastern portion of Alexander's empire in the years following his death at the age of 32. Control over Bactria and the Indus River Valley was tenuous at best. Before 300 BC, much of this territory had been lost to the Indian Mauryan Empire of Chandragupta. In the peace that followed the war between the two empires, Chandragupta married Seleucus's daughter and gifted his father-in-law 500 trained war elephants, which he used to great effect in his wars in the west. Not long after, the Greek cities of Bactria overthrew Seleucid rule, establishing a wealthy kingdom that controlled much of the land trade to and from China and India. They were able to withstand a major Seleucid invasion and a nearly 3-year-long siege of their capital city of Balkh, causing the exhausted Seleucids to sue for peace. Over the next 2 decades, the Seleucid Empire was also greatly weakened by the rise of another one of their former vassals, the Arsacid Parthians. In the southeast, the Mauryan Empire collapsed. The Greco-Bactrians were then able to effectively fill much of the power vacuum left by these two empires, but their success was halted by internal division. As much of the army was in India, expanding Greco-Bactrian territory, the king was overthrown by a usurper, splitting the empire into 2 kingdoms, which both experienced several decades of relative stability and prosperity. And
Yeah, this area is so interesting because so much happened. Obviously we did cover the Seleucid kingdom and whatnot, but it's really cool to see like another parts, the Greco-Bactrian, and now I was not aware of the Indo-Greek kingdom. Like, very interesting.
flourishing of a culture that was a unique amalgamation of Greek, Iranian, Indian, and other Central Asian cultures. After the Greco-Bactrians suffered a series of severe military defeats by the Parthians, they were overrun by successive waves of nomadic invaders. The most powerful of these tribal confederations were the Uz and the Saka, or Scythians, who established control over the lower Indus Valley. The Uz settled in Bactria and largely assimilated with the local people over time. After the waves of nomadic invasions calmed down to some extent, the Parthians then conquered much of the east, up until the Indus River. The Parthian Arsacid dynasty was very hands-off in their style of governance, and were content as long as taxes were paid and men supplied to the army when needed. And as they became increasingly focused on halting Roman expansion into Mesopotamia, the Parthian noble family that had defeated the Scythians and had seized control over the Indus River seceded from the empire, establishing the Suren kingdom, or more commonly called the Indo-Parthian kingdom. And although they ceased to pay taxes, and their king claimed equal status to the Parthian great king, the two states appear to have been allies and deeply involved in each other's politics. In the north, the Greco-Bactrian people and Uz tribes formed the Kushan kingdom, and became an empire at the expense of the Parthians, and then expanded deep into Central Asia and the Indian subcontinent. The Kushans worshipped Greek as well as Hindu gods, but gradually over time, Buddhism became more prevalent and was widely promoted within the empire's borders. And even without with Buddhist merchants and missionaries traveling to Han China, which many believe were the first to introduce Buddhism to China. The Kushan Empire was the crossroads of the world. Manufactured goods from as far away as China, Rome, and Aksumite Ethiopia would have been common sights in the great cities of the Kushan Empire. In the west, the Parthians succumbed to internal infighting which allowed the Sassanid Persians to overthrow them, viewing themselves as the re-establishment of the ancient Achaemenid Persian Empire that Alexander had toppled. The reinvigorated
Yeah, the Persian Empire is such an interesting empire because I guess technically, I mean, if you do view the Sassanids, which a lot of history people that we've watched a lot of videos from call the Sassanids the Persian Empire. That's just another name that they use. So I guess if you look at it, the Persian Empire had literally two lives. The Achaemenid Persian Empire and then the Sassanid Persian Empire. That's really cool, I think. That's like unique. I one of the few empires I can think that literally came back from the dead. I mean, that's if you counted in the same kind of thing. A lot of people seem to do, but again, something I always found interesting about this region is we always, in various videos that we look at and we touch upon this region, there's always change happening, which I really like. It's never like, obviously you have, you know, the Achaemenid Empire, right? And then you have Alexander's Macedonian Empire, and then you have the Seleucids, and then you have Parthia, and then you have, you know, the Sassanids, and then you have the Mongols, and then you have the Timurids, and it's just like, I think the Safavids, right, that were a rival to the Ottomans also may have gotten around here, like, I guess Central Asia, like, you know, between the Middle East and all that. It is a place that is always dramatically changing in regimes and like empires and kingdoms. Very unstable in that aspect, but I think that's what makes it so fascinating to me. Because every time we touch around this area in various videos, it's always a new empire, always a new kingdom, always something new. So much like civilizations and cultures and stuff have existed in this like area. That's why I find it so interesting, you know what I mean? So yeah, this video is definitely putting that into perspective, just how so much has happened from forces westward and eastward and all that. India, what, you know, further east, and just all these different groups all clashing here and spreading their influence. I find that just so fascinating.
Persians successfully campaigned to the north, south, east, and west, quickly overrunning the Kushan Empire, and established the Kushan Shahs as vassal kings of a greatly diminished territory, and were gradually stripped of their military and administrative power. During the intermediate period of Sasanian decline, the nomadic Kidarites and then Hephthalites gained control over the eastern portion of the empire, and like the Yuezhi before them, they largely adopted much of the local culture before being reconquered by the Sasanians. It was during Sasanian rule that the first recorded instance of the term Afghan was made in reference to the people inhabiting the mountainous eastern provinces of the empire, and is likely derived from the Pashtun ethnic group, which is the largest in Afghanistan, by the time of this region's conquest by the Arab caliphates.
Wow, that's really cool. Oh yeah, and the caliphates as well. Well, that's really cool. So that's the beginning of that term.
Buddhism and the Persian Zoroastrian faith were the dominant religions in the land that proved difficult to control. Whenever a large Arab army left, the locals would rebel and revert to their ancient customs and self-rule. In the east, Kabul managed to remain an independent, wealthy city-state, controlling trade through the Khyber Pass to India, ruled over by Buddhists and Hindus. It was not until the late 9th century that the Safarid dynasty, founded by a Persian coppersmith born in southwestern Afghanistan, successfully rebelled against the Abbasid Caliphate and firmly established local rule, that Afghans began to convert to Islam, which the dynasty widely promoted. The Saffarids were overthrown by the Samanid Empire, whose rulers claimed descent from the Sasanian Persians, and extensively promoted Persian culture and Islam throughout the empire. They made the mistake of utilizing Turkic slave soldiers, which in time overthrew them and established the Ghaznavid dynasty. Based out of the city of Ghazna in eastern Afghanistan, they continued the
Yeah, some of these empires I've never even heard of. Like, I see what I mean? There's so much happened, huh?
policies of promoting Islam and Persian culture, particularly among the nomadic Turkic tribes that were settled within the empire. The Ghaznavids were greatly weakened by conflict with the Seljuk Turk Empire, which allowed for their overthrow by the native Ghurid dynasty, which had recently converted from Buddhism to Islam, and were possibly of Pashtun descent. During the reign of Sultan Ghiyath al-Din Muhammad, the Ghurid Sultanate became a major world power, stretching from the Iranian plateau to Bengal in the east. However, after Ghiyath al-Din's death, the empire fell into infighting and was rapidly conquered by both the Delhi Sultanate in India and the Empire of Khorasan, both of Turkic Mamluk origin. Only 15 years after their conquest of the Ghurid Sultanate, Khorasan was overrun by the Mongol Empire of Genghis Khan, who frequently massacred the populations of cities that did not immediately surrender. The Mongol Empire split into several successor states not long after their conquest of the region. The Il Khanate, as the name coincidentally implies, fell ill and was ravaged by the plague, wiping out much of the Mongol.
Alright, I love the little joke there. They lived up to their name. Oh man, it's hilarious. But see what I mean? Some of these empires and like dynasties and I've never heard of them. Like, there's so much. Man, I gotta look it up. Like I said, there's just so much different groups and like empires and stuff.
Family and army, and as the Il Khanate fragmented into many small states, the Tajik vassal princes of Herat established a sizable kingdom for a short time. All of these small states were conquered by the Turco-Mongol warlord Tamerlane, who inflicted even greater slaughter and destruction throughout the Near East than the Mongols had done a few generations before.
The dude's a menace, bro. Timur, literally the most terrifying guy in history, in my opinion. My goodness.
Frequently used Afghanistan as his base of operations, and his descendants moved the capital from Samarkand to Herat. The century following Timur's death began with peace and prosperity and ended with internal strife and civil war, with its territory being lost to the Uzbeks in the north, the Safavid Persians in the west, and in the southeast the emergent Mughal Empire, which would go on to conquer most of India, claiming descent from Timur and Genghis Khan. Throughout the 17th century, Afghanistan became a largely autonomous buffer zone between the powerful Safavid and Mughal empires. In 1709, the Pashtun Hotak dynasty successfully rebelled and established a short-lived empire by conquering a great deal of Iranian territory. The Safavid Empire was overthrown by the soldier of fortune Nader Shah. He was the son of a common herdsman and one of
we actually, I remember we covered a video about Nader Shah and his great exploits and his unfortunate end as, you know, he tried to unite the Islamic world and ended up having to quell so many rebellions and then dying. It's, yeah, really cool, really interesting guy. He definitely left an impression on me. It's, especially since he's been like nicknamed the Napoleon of the East or something like that. So really cool dude, I have to say.
Most brilliant military strategists ever to have lived. He reconquered Afghanistan and defeated Ottoman and Mughal armies, but his reign was brought short when he was assassinated at the age of 48. One of his cavalry commanders, Ahmad Shah Durrani, was a Pashtun and returned to his homeland, where a Pashtun tribal confederation selected him as their leader. He used his military experience to great effect, conquering those cities that did not join his cause in Afghanistan. And during his long 25-year reign, he successfully campaigned in India 3 times against the Marathas and Mughals, and even sacked their capital city of Delhi in 1757. The Durrani Empire is considered the foundation of the modern state of Afghanistan, and Ahmad Shah Durrani as the father of the nation. The empire declined after they were defeated.
That's really cool. Alright, that's interesting that this is considered like almost laying the foundations of modern Afghanistan. Wow.
By the Sikhs and driven out of the Indian subcontinent. However, the greatest factor influencing their decline may have been economic, as trade was cut off to China due to poor diplomatic relations, and the traffic along the ancient land trade routes connecting India, Iran, and Central Asia all but disappeared. This was due to the expansion of the Russian Empire into Central Asia and the dominance of the British East India Company over maritime trade, leaving Afghanistan in a more isolated state than it had been in over 2,000 years, but also a more unified one, with the majority of the country practicing the same religion, Sunni Islam, and the concept of a national Afghan identity became prevalent, regardless of tribal or ethnic affiliation. The Durrani were overthrown by Dost Muhammad Khan, who established the Emirate of Afghanistan. The British.
Okay, that's really cool. I guess finally the term Afghanistan is now being used to describe, the nation there. And there's definitely that, like, growth of, like, national... It's an interesting development that happened later on, because throughout, like, earlier history, there would be groups of people, like, the Greeks, for example, or whatnot, and they wouldn't really be unified, like, by a nation... in a national sense, like we think of, like, nowadays, like the Greeks, or in Greece, the Indians, or in India, like, you know what I mean? But so much of history, groups were, despite dwelling what we know as, like, modern countries, were splintered and fractured. There was something that happened, I think, in, like, the 1800s, that were, like, something about, like, empires started losing their grip, and there was, like, a real sense of, like, national pride, and, like, that just took over the world, as groups were like, okay, we're gonna all band together now, and we want our independence. We want, for example, Greece for the Greeks, like, you know what I mean? And united in a more national sense by culture and language that didn't seem to be that prevalent, like, in much older history. And that's how, like, certain empires, like the Austrian Empire, lost control, because they were ruling a ethnicity empire, but, like, obviously groups like the Germans wanted to be all united in Germany, and the Serbians wanted to all be united in you get what I mean, right? There definitely is that sense of growing and just unity that I feel like kind of took over. I felt like it was really prevalent in the 1800s onward, and kind of led to nowadays, So I don't know why that all happened, that growth of nationalism and stuff, but it is something I've noticed a lot in the background of these videos everywhere in the world. So I find that really cool, you know what I mean? And yeah.
Who had largely gained control over India and its revenue, feared that the Russians would take Afghanistan and use it as a staging ground to take India from them. So to preempt the Russians, they invaded instead and reinstalled the deposed Durrani king on
Someone's gonna invade Afghanistan. It's gonna be us first, essentially. Oh my gosh.
the throne, who was widely disliked. After encountering minimal resistance to their conquest and occupation of the country, the British withdrew most of their troops back to India. The remaining British occupying force was then ambushed and was almost completely slaughtered as they attempted to retreat from the country. In an event that shocked Great Britain and the Western world, the Afghans then reinstated Dost Muhammad Khan on the throne of the country.
Again, that's really interesting, considering that the British, especially, were at their peak, the most powerful, largest empire in the world. So definitely, like, defying them is shocking in that sense, you know what I mean? And it kind of goes to show you, like, we already established earlier this video, when occupying force would kind of leave them alone, they would immediately rebel and then immediately go back to how they viewed they should, be. And that's kind of a thing you can't really tame, I guess, Afghanistan in that sense. Even that happened to America. The American withdrawal and everything that happened, like, you can't just tame it, especially by force. And that just seems to be kind of the thing about this region's history, with you see so much fall of empires and kingdoms trying to establish their rule here, yet they couldn't fully direct control, direct rule for a lot of times, sometimes even hands-off approach. And I think that's just very telling that this is kind of a region that's just hard to really control. So I find that just a key trait that I'm starting to pick up about this area in history, you know?
4 decades after the first invasion, the British invaded again. A peace was concluded after both sides suffered heavy casualties. Afghanistan became a British protectorate, with the Afghans maintaining complete self-rule, and the British handling their foreign affairs, which they didn't do too much of anyways. Namely, no canoodling with the Ruskies. 40 years later, in a third Anglo-Afghan war, 120,000 Afghans invaded India. After a few brief clashes with the British, a treaty was made where Afghanistan would be internationally recognized as a fully independent state. A few years later, in 1926, the country...
Again, that's really interesting. They're fighting the British, who at this point, like I said, are still incredibly powerful. And the fact that they just keep, you know, having these wars, these Anglo-Afghan wars, and coming out with good deals like self-rule, self-autonomy, now, like, you know, recognition of their independence is, like, that goes to show that, like, these deals seem to be favoring them more. So definitely they must have inflicted quite a lot of damage on the British, that the British are constantly making these kind of concessions that, at least on the surface, seem to be helping Afghanistan more, you know?
The country was reformed into the Kingdom of Afghanistan and began the process of modernization and increased contacts with the outside world. In 1973, the monarchy was overthrown in a bloodless coup d'etat by the king's cousin, Mohammed Daoud Khan, who became the president of a single-party republic, who further sought to modernize the country and received aid from the Soviet Union and the United States, who both tried to curry influence over the country. In 1978, Daoud and many of his family members were assassinated during a communist coup d'etat, establishing the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan. This Soviet-backed government pushed wide-ranging reforms that sought to modernize and abolish most traditional and religious societal structures. This caused widespread insurrection and Soviet involvement in a long war of attrition that nearly lasted 10 years, and caused millions of refugees to leave the country. A few years after the Soviet Union withdrew their forces, the Islamic State of Afghanistan overthrew the government and took over the cities, which was largely...
Again, a trend. An outside force will try to impose influence, but then they're gonna leave eventually, and they're just gonna go back to doing what they want. Oh my gosh, that is so wild. Even, like I said, it happened with America too, when America withdrew, right? That was like a big talk over here a few years back. So that is just wild to me that it's still like this has been happening in this region for so long, even to like our lifetime. Dang, man.
Overthrown by the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan in 1996, which established a totalitarian rule. They were removed from power 5 years later by U.S. coalition forces and the Northern Alliance, and established the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan in 2004. Let me know in the comments of what you believe the future holds for Afghanistan. Also, let me know in the comments.
When did this video come out? Okay, yeah, it happened before the U.S. withdrawal, because I was gonna be like, oh, is that it? Okay, as we know what happened. Dang. Dang, that's really interesting. Alright, that was a really cool video, like I said. There's definitely, like, here in America, when we talk about, like in the news and stuff, about, like, the Middle East all the way to, like, Central Asia, it's definitely not in the best light. Like, certain news sources definitely make these places seem way more I mean, there is volatileness, but you know what I mean, like, places of extremism and terrorism, and, you know, a lot of, like, terror, and, very regressed and trapped in, like, very strict, religious rule. And I think in some areas definitely you can say that for sure, but, like, you know, obviously you can't just like write off everything like that, because there is a lot of, I think, interesting places. And you know, things are never as simple as that in history as that you find, and with groups and with nations. But I feel like I was really interested in finding out about more about this place and its history, and I'm happy to get a much better picture of it. So overall, another great video. I really enjoyed it, and I hope that maybe we could touch more on this region later. So until then, thank you and have a great rest of your day.